Let me preface this video by saying I love Lauren Southern, okay? I'm not even, no cap, bro, no cap. Listen, Lauren Southern has always been good to me every time we've chatted. We've chatted a couple times. Cool, man. Cool as I don't know what, man. I respect Lauren. Interestingly enough, I'm going to speak some straight facts, man. I know a lot of you guys aren't fond of Miss Southern, and that's okay. But listen, like I said, she's always been good to me. So I'm going to respect her, okay? So this video is a labor of love, right? Because I got to do it to her. I got to. Not because I don't like her, but quite the opposite. It's because I love Lauren Southern enough that I must tell her the truth. So understand where this video is coming from. My true adversary in this video, right, is the sisterhood. The sisterhood is a lie told by a fearful society, hoping to be wrong. What's that mean? It means that when you base your expectations on women coming together to help each other, you will find yourself being incredibly disappointed every time. You're probably confused. I understand, because I didn't actually give you any preface or preamble, right? Lauren Southern released a video talking about her marriage, talking about her husband, her ex-husband, rather, her divorce. She said some things in there that were reminiscent of stories that numerous women have gone through consistently. What bothers me about this is the fact that so many women go through this consistently, and yet the conclusions that oftentimes they come to is that we men, not Lauren Southern, but like, you know, the sisterhood, is that we men are crap, garbage, trash. We suck. We're terrible. We're just wolves in sheep's clothing. And they're really good at detecting all the crappy men. Except they're not, because they somehow end up always finding themselves with them. But there's nothing wrong with women's ability to detect men. It's that, I guess these guys are just really good at subterfuge and villainy. Because women seem to have no issue figuring out who's on the spectrum, who's a shy, awkward noid. But when it comes to these type of men who do what they do in their marriages and their relationship to their children, of which you shall see, do not worry, the blinders are always on them. Happened to Miss Southern too. As much as I respect Lauren, as much as I love her, as much as I'll find myself still watching her, reaching out to her from time to time, I have to say, at the end of the day, she's still a modern woman. And you'll see. Because again, as I've just said, the same tale is spun from young ladies over and over and over and over and over again. And that tale that is spun by them in their crappy, awful relationships is when they first meet this dude, whoever he is. He's whatever they want. He triggers the spark. There's this je ne sais quoi about him. He's just so great. Everything's perfect. They have their honeymoon phase. But slowly and surely, he starts to break down. He starts mistreating her. All of those sweet nothings he had at the beginning, all of that drive and all that love and care at the start fades away into nothing. And instead, what is left is, honestly, a rather terrible, craptastic individual. Now, I respect Lauren quite a bit. Lauren does something that I see very seldom in people. She says this.
Let me preface this by saying, I do not want to turn this into a political thing. This is not man versus woman or feminist versus patriarchy. This is or was my real life, and I am not trying to assassinate my ex-husband's character. I am just trying to recount what really happened, what I actually experienced, and the impact it had on me and my child. I find that when people take to the internet to talk about and discuss anything regarding relationships, the modern tendency is for either side to concoct their villains, to make the man out to be some evil mastermind or the woman out to be a heartless femoid vampire. This is silliness and does not encapsulate real human relationships whatsoever.
Oftentimes when people tell the tale of their exes, they always talk about them as if they are truly a villainous person. Talk about them like they're just the worst individual of whom the world has ever seen, right? Especially a lot of single mother raccoons. A lot of women that talk about their trash dudes, I promise, okay? If you listen to the way some women talk about the men they've dated, you would think that this man wakes up to bury the light. Before he calls her on the phone to complain about whatever child support baby mama drama he has, you would bet $1,000, bruh puts on Bury the Light from Devil May Cry 5 before he gets on the phone. I'm telling you, the way they talk about these young men is like they are just the scourge of the earth. But not Lauren. What Lauren tries to do is she tries to move away from that, and I greatly respect it. The only problem is, this guy actually is kind of craptastic. He is. I'll show you. I'll point it out to you guys. Lauren's original video is an hour long. Obviously, I'm going to be hyper-focusing on her descriptions of her husband and the conclusion she comes to, because that's really what made me want to make the video.
Marriage was this massive dream for me. I mean, despite my media antics, traveling around the world, building this career, I genuinely did want that stay-at-home wife life that so many LARP about online. I really was just so desperate for this life that I had in my head that I assumed my husband had in his head as well. And as a result of that, I rushed into marriage. Like a college kid who picks up the Communist Manifesto and decides to join the revolution, I simply never bothered to ask some of the most obvious questions, like, can this person deliver what they claim to want? Or can I trust their promises, in this case vows? Or will reality simply break them into pieces? For any marriage, this is a question that cannot go unanswered. But as I was soon to learn, it was especially vital to know the answer in my case, because being married to me has its own unique challenges. The main one being, I am super controversial. And for someone with a respectable job like my husband had, that's a big problem. The thing is, though, calling it a respectable job is underselling the situation a bit. A lawyer is a respectable job. A doctor is a respectable job. You could even consider a teacher a respectable job. But for the most part, those respectable jobs do not require a security clearance. My husband's job did. And I know that there will be rampant speculation about what that means, but I really don't want to hurt his career any more than I may have already by getting into the details of it. I mean, all I will say is that pairing someone with a high-level security clearance with an activist who obviously has problems with almost every government around the world for her anti-government sentiments, that is going to be a nightmare no matter who the people are. And we both knew that going into dating, let alone marrying. We knew it would be tough. I mean, all I will say is that pairing someone with a high-level security clearance with an activist who obviously has problems with almost every government around the world for her anti-government sentiments, that is going to be a nightmare no matter who the people are. And we both knew that going into dating, let alone marrying. We knew it would be tough. We discussed the possibility that he might either lose his job or forfeit any chance at advancement if he were to marry me due to my activism. In fact, that and the massive distance between us were two of the main reasons for me being apprehensive about dating him in the first place. I didn't want to live in Australia or complicate his life's work for that matter, and I told him so very clearly.
So, the irony is not lost on Lauren herself, apparently, that of all of the young men that she could have picked to be with, she picks an Australian Fed. I'm sorry. It's more the Fed thing. It's more the Fed thing than the Australian thing. Listen, there's a lot of different one-liners I can make. Like, here's the obvious one. It's obligatory, right? Apparently, he must have done something down under for... Okay. It's obligatory. I had to do it, right? It's not lost on me, right? Here's the thing. It's interesting because it almost seems with a lot of modern women, not all obviously, but a lot, they always seem to find some way to be with a man they'd have no business being with. It's interesting that Lauren Southern, libertarian malcontent of the government, who is incredibly vocal about it and has, gone on all of her different adventures, finds herself in the arms of an Australian Fed operative that needs, clearance and stuff. Like, bruh's up there. Bruh's a manager. He's doing whatever he's doing, bruh. Right? Again, no business being together. They really should not have even been here from start to finish. But what happens with a lot of young ladies, and I'm sure it happened to Miss Southern, is the spark. The je ne sais quoi. The force. Diatope. Whatever the flip happened in Rise of Skywalker. their minds meld, right? Women, they always come up with this narrative, and again, I apologize, Miss Southern, but you do happen to be afflicted with the woman. They always have this romantic, fluffy narrative. Reason flies out the window. They don't really think too critical about all the different elements that flow into it. And as such, we get this situation here. Well, again, oddly enough, it really is strange that these guys are even together to begin with. But here's one of the things that just becomes really interesting. How they end up in Canada.
And yet he claimed to care so deeply, so much for me, that he was willing to switch careers if he had to. He would move to Canada at the drop of a hat to be with me. And, you know, that was one of those head over heels romantic moments that I think every girl wants to hear. The career, it's just not as important as you. I'm willing to give it up. And before you scoff, know this, he did mean it. Because he did move to Canada to be with me, and he did change jobs. And during his time here, we had some truly beautiful moments together, which I will never regret, the most important of which being our decision to get married and have a son. I wanted a son and a daughter, so did he, so really, you know, looking at the situation at the time, it was like, what's the problem here?
So our friend here gives up his federal career for a life of mediocrity with the love of his life. He tells Lauren that he is willing to sacrifice his job to be with her because she's just that wonderful, right? Or whatever he must have told her, I don't really know. And of course, as you heard, Lauren thought it was very romantic. Of course she did, right? He gave up his whole life for me. This happens with a lot of young ladies as well. They get caught up in the swirl of being special, of being significant to the guy that they want. I have to assume that bruh here was a nice Australian Chad. I have to assume bruh here rustled Lauren in the correct areas. Because when you think hard about Lauren Southern's stint on the internet, let's not sit here and pretend Miss Southern did not cause a tidal wave of thirst. And this is the thing that kind of got me upon my first viewing of Lauren's video. All the men in the world. I remember 2014, 15, and 16. I remember when Miss Southern first made her video on Rebel Media. And I remember the thirst well of all of the men who wished they could just receive a reply in their DMs from Miss Southern. The power at her fingertips when it came to men's thirst and her ability to get male attention was astronomical. It was crazy. And this is what's so interesting to me about the modern woman. Despite the fact that they have the ability to do that, appear on the internet, say things that everyone or a lot of young men want, and then we'll have their pickings of millions of dudes, they somehow still find themselves being with a person they don't have any business being with. Now again, it's important to note how this story begins. That our Australian fed op here sacrifices his career to be with Miss Southern. What happens next is he finds himself saddened. The life of mediocrity, of dead-end jobs, and being with the woman millions of men wish they could have been with was not enough for him. No. He starts getting upset. He starts being upset with that mediocre, normal, silly, traditional life of which he chose. By the way, we'll allow Lauren to tell her story some more.
Couples, people have honeymoon periods, and when ours ended and the more mundane life set in, I was actually pretty content with it. I was really happy with it. But for my husband, it seemed like the reality of losing his life's work was beginning to set in. And understandably so. To give up his home and job that he had spent every day of his life working towards, risked so much for, achieved all this status and respect, to just throw that away and be nobody, that just got harder and harder for him to cope with, especially once he started doing the more boring work he had in Canada and found it, frankly, intolerable. And it's not that I simply left him alone with these feelings. I did not. I did my best to comfort and make things easier for him. I obviously had some savings from doing YouTube before, and I used that to split rent, pay for groceries and life costs, and kind of take that burden off his shoulders whenever I could. Took care of the home, our child, both when I was pregnant and after I'd given birth, because that's what you do in a partnership. You give 100% of what you can to build up, the team. But it wasn't enough because the fact was he was still trapped in jobs that felt like dead ends after what he had given up before. So perhaps it is not surprising that a few months or so after I'd given birth, he accepted a new job in Australia one that was closer to the kind of work that he had left behind. And when I say he accepted it, I mean without my input. He didn't consult me at all. He just announced one day that we were moving to Australia. Which again, I understand. When you feel as trapped as he clearly did, you will gnaw off your own leg, and telling your wife to pack a suitcase probably felt minor in comparison. But that does not change the fact that he had said we would live in Canada, and finding this out right after I had given birth and just started to rebuild my community support systems after such a chaotic change in my life came as quite a shock. All of which is to say I was a little upset. A little upset he hadn't consulted me because I felt we should make these decisions together as a couple. And to be clear, I didn't actually refuse to go. I just told him I would have had an easier time supporting him in making that move if we had talked about it properly beforehand. Which, rather than kind of change his tune and take the approach that I wish we had in the first place of talking about it together, his response was to say I either make the move or he would divorce me.
And of course that culminates into what has to be one of the most bitch-ass nigga moves I've ever seen in my bloody life. Who does that? Who does that? It should not sell an understatement at all. Listen, Lauren, I understand you don't want to paint your husband as terrible because you love him. I get that. Or your ex-husband. I get it, But listen, I'm not you. He's a bitch-ass nigga. That right there is grime city. Who threatens to divorce Lauren Southern because she doesn't want to move out to bloody Australia? Gives her an ultimatum. I mean, that's just kind of nasty just on its surface, just by itself. That's just a real grimy thing to do to somebody you're supposed to love and care about. Why would you abandon your bloody child? You see, that's really my problem here. Look, to be fair, it is both funny and confusing to me that he gets the Lauren Southern. Millions of men wish they could have been that guy. He is that guy, and he has the nerve. He's quick to say, I will leave here. It is interesting to me how women seem to always pick the men that don't want them. They always seem to be able to pick the man that is can just so easily cut off for them. And of course, look at our red pill, black pill truths. Hypergamy, women like men with status, women like dudes that don't need them, and you see that all the time. I'm not going to spend much time investing into that line of thought in this video. We have more in the future coming on that. It's interesting and funny. Doesn't change the fact that, again, even if we're fine with a man saying that he doesn't care that this is the Lauren Southern, scratch it. How does a man look at his own child and says, I will divorce you and move to another country away from my seed, my legacy? How do you do that? It's crazy to me. I can't fathom the idea. I really can't. And to me, that more than anything else should really denote the nasty character that he had, to even want to suggest an ultimatum like that to force Lauren's hand. It is interesting how all the pieces come together. Lauren gives up her political career, and at first we all just thought that she just was content with her traditional life. But as it turns out, no. He forced her hand. But the problems continue, actually. Let's allow Lauren to continue.
And our marriage certainly did not have an easier time in Australia. Getting in, as I've already explained before, was a nightmare for me. One which ultimately required me to give up my political career. Yet even without politics, I was already staring down the barrel of travel restrictions or similar issues. And all while my husband was not only seemingly ashamed of me, but paranoid that discovery of our marriage by certain individuals would impact his work at his new job. Even under the best possible circumstances, feelings like that would eventually curdle into resentment, and they did here. His resentment did not come from nowhere. His position undoubtedly suffered when his colleagues became aware that I was his wife, but even so, it was absolutely not healthy for either of us. He was forced to live with a wife who he increasingly saw as a millstone around his neck, whereas I was trapped alone in Australia with no family or friends and a husband who resented me.
Crazy, is it not? Again, there's no way I can undersell this. This man gets the Lauren Southern, the center of so many men's thirst, so many men's desires, and he finds himself resenting her. All of this are choices that he made. The decision to give up his career in the first place to be with Lauren Southern in Canada was his choice. The fact that he picked Lauren Southern of all bloody women in the world he could have picked from was his choice. Returning to Australia after strong-arming Lauren Southern to go back with him was also his bloody choice. And then he finds himself scared, worried that his colleagues will find out that his wife is Lauren Southern. He has the Lauren Southern and he must hide her. Again, I do find it rather interesting that of all the men in the world Miss Southern could have picked, she picks the man that is damn near ashamed of her. And of such, he pressures her to this extent. He messes with her mind. And I feel a good bit bad for her, honestly, because, honestly, no one should have to feel such pain from the individual that's supposed to protect them, that's supposed to love them, that's supposed to be there for them when no one else is around. That person absolutely should not be your greatest adversary. And yet, for so many people, this tale is spun so many times. Is it not, dear viewer? Everything is great and wonderful at first. Everything is just perfect. And I'll tell you why. I've said it in many different videos, but it must be mentioned here. Everyone, even me, puts on their representative when we first meet them. Everyone is putting their best foot forward to get you to like them. Very seldom are people truly open. I'm cognizant of this. And even I still have a bit of a representative while trying to thread out and be as upfront and honest as I can. Even I do it with full knowledge. The issue is not to be scared or worried of the representative, but to know it's there and to peel back the layers. To truly understand who you're dealing with. When you are reliant on the spark, the je ne sais quoi, the vibe, the energies, which is all just covert words for saying you just find the man bloody sexually attractive in an environment of which you find no man sexually attractive, so he just rings so special and true. When you do that, you give reckless abandon to all of the important questions. And to be fair, Miss Lauren Southern does indeed acknowledge that she didn't ask the critical good questions.
I simply never bothered to ask some of the most obvious questions, like, can this person deliver what they claim to want? Or can I trust their promises, in this case vows, or will reality simply break them into pieces?
The important thing about this video that I'm making, and what's awesomely presented by Lauren, is that you, dear viewer, hopefully if you're a young lady and you stop by and you watch this, can learn from this. Young men, you've got some notes to be taking too. You can't get caught in the representative. You can't get caught in the honeymoon. You can't get caught in the good, sparkly feelings. You have to peel back the layer, and you have to find what's actually important about that person. And what is actually important about that person? I say it all the time. Let's see if you guys pay attention, if you're a longtime fan of mine. It's their say it with me now. Virtue. It's their character. It's their honor. It's who they actually really are that you need to be looking for. Miss Southern became acquainted with who our Australian Fed really was. A resentful man with a constitution made of bloody cotton. The fact that he finds himself being frustrated and aggravated at his slowing career, unable to get the clearance he once had, the respect he once had, because he chose to be with Lauren Southern. Look, ain't nobody told him to be with Miss Southern. No one. He made that choice. He finds himself being aggravated about it. That's his real character. We see who he really is, unfortunately, within the confines of the marriage, not in the honeymoon phase that so many people find themselves being lured in and trapped by. Miss Southern, continue.
The low point of this all was probably lockdown, which for me was so traumatic that I have repressed large chunks of my memory. I cannot tell you guys how lonely and painful it was being stuck by myself in a big house all day with someone who, for weeks at a time, would hardly acknowledge me beyond a dismissive hello, or worse, just give me reminders of what absolute deadweight I was for his life and career. I mean, even going outside, the streets were mostly empty except a couple kangaroos. There weren't community events going on. I couldn't meet new people. It was like I was living in this eternal limbo in that country, tormented by the idea that my husband might leave us at any moment. Particularly tormented because I still loved him, but also having left work to be a stay-at-home mom, I certainly did not have enough funds to support myself or our son if he were to do so, and no way to return home to my family because of government COVID restrictions at the time. I didn't want to get too political at this part of the video, but I really don't think people realize, certainly not governments, the absolute depths of darkness that lockdown brought to some of us. As I mentioned earlier, I filmed this section like 3 times, and I cried the first few times. I'm finally at a point where I can read this without breaking down, but it was just completely horrific for me, and I don't think my mental health has even recovered to this day. As I said, can barely remember many of those months, because I don't want to rekindle them in my mind. And make no mistake, I was trying, even though it was a pretty depressing situation to be in. I spent literally every day of my waking existence desperately trying to think of ways to make my husband see me, to love me the way that he used to. If I just cooked dinner right, and if I made the perfect dessert, the perfect breakfast, if I ironed enough of his shirts, if I made the right amount of romantic gestures, then maybe he would feel differently about me. I really tried all of it, but nothing worked. In retrospect, that to my husband, our marriage was already over. And he was looking for every excuse, no matter how small, to end it in law as well as in fact, which might explain why I never so much as uttered the word divorce once when we were living together, and he brought it up easily over 100 times. And often over things that still make no sense to me to this day. But sense or no sense, I kept trying to fix whatever problems he would raise without regard for how possible they were, because we were married. I think because he had acknowledged the threat to his career that marrying me would pose at the beginning of our relationship and seemingly accepted it, he never would use this as his reason for divorce, but it was something he brought up every day as a frustration, all while pinning his divorce reasons on seemingly less important things. One such complaint had to do with my ADHD. He told me he could not be with me unless I fixed it, like absolutely fixed it. So I tried. I went and I got officially diagnosed in Australia at a specified clinic. I began taking Vyvanse, which is an ADHD stimulant drug. They've got others like Concerta, or you've probably heard of Ritalin. I started taking that daily to try to manage it. I understand even now how frustrating having a partner with ADHD can be, largely because it frustrates me to have it. But I did everything one can possibly do to try to manage it, and it still wasn't enough.
And as such, it's time to bring this video to a close. I've kind of said all I've needed to say to lay down the pieces to say this. We talked about the fact that ladies somehow always manage to find themselves being with someone they shouldn't be with. Somehow, Miss Southern, who could have had any dude that would have just been happy to be there. And I mean, just happy. Lauren Southern could have been with a dude that's like Chance the Rapper. Just, oh, I love my wife. I love my wife. Ah! Could have had that. Didn't pick him. Lauren Southern could have been with a dude that every single day he rose up, he just looks at her with just the biggest smile on his face. Just happy to be there. Could have been with a man who literally go in the Sonic drive-thru and say, well, hi there. Ah, man, I just feel so good today. Oh, yes, my wife, Lauren Southern, with love and number one. Yes. Now, did I mention that my wife is Lauren Southern? She could have had that. She didn't pick it. Women are adverse to any scent of weakness. And as such, a man who is like that is weak. He's desperate. He doesn't have options. He doesn't have the spark. He doesn't have the jitters. He doesn't have the edge. He doesn't have the masculinity as so many women want. Women want to feel special being with a man. They don't want to feel like they're followed around. They don't want a puppy dog. But the interesting thing about said puppy dog is he's the one that's going to make your life better. He's the man that's going to walk through fire and flame to make sure that you're taken care of. He's the man that's going to love you when no one else in the world does. But it is perceived as weakness. Simp! Simp activity. Simpery, it is. If only women understood the power that they have. Instead of trying to take the ambitious alpha and bend him to their will as if he were a bloody Pokemon or mega-level Digimon, if they just pick the man that is happy to be there, loves you for who you are, and wants to keep following you around. Well, maybe not following you around, but certainly happy to be there. Follow you around, that might be a little too much, because honestly, a lot of you guys run around like chickens with their head cut off. Not follow you around, but happy to be there. Present, attentive, kind, loving, respectful, has virtue. If you pick that, you're going to be doing a lot better. I'm telling you guys, man. Something is off with ambitious men. Every time I hear these stories of these dudes who are also very ambitious, I promise to you guys, they might also just be a bit psychopathic. Maybe you can sprinkle a little bit of narcissistic personality disorder in these guys. Something is going on with men who are ambitious, because every time I hear one of these dudes who can't be content, who wants to climb corporate ladders, that wants so much status, something ain't right with them. Ladies love ambition. You hear them talk about it all the time. On the list of things that they need in a man, an ambitious man. It's interesting, because you would think that greed would again denounce or would show such vice. It would show just how nasty that person is going to be in the end. It seems to be rather correlated with each other. And ambitious men seem to care not for their families. They seem to care not for morality a lot of the time. They care not for the other people that they're supposed to be taking care of. It would appear that they give reckless abandon to everything but their own passions and their own desires, which is its own vice, I would say. I point this out because, again, you would think that the sisterhood, of whom has cataloged how trash and garbage so many young men are, that they would have figured that out long before I did, but they didn't. The sisterhood does not tell young ladies that there's something off about these ambitious men who seem to lack morality, who seem to lack care, who seem to lack compassion, who seem to lack honor. Think about it, all the Justin Wallers of the world who say, I'm just not wired that way to be with one woman, so I need a whole-ass harem. How come the sisterhood doesn't say something, young ladies, about this long before they get here? Why wasn't Lauren Southern made aware that a man who is this hungry for power could not lay his sword down and pick up his plow, pick up his shovel, and be content? I'll tell you why. The sisterhood is a lie, told by a fearful society, hoping to be wrong. And as such, again, leads us to this final clip I need to talk about. Lauren Southern, as smart as she is, comes to the wrong conclusions. And it's something that happens to a lot of young ladies that end up going through these bad relationships. They seem to always be upset with everything but what they actually need to be.
Yes, I made a bad choice. I got married way too quickly. That is something I need to take responsibility for. In retrospect, he said all of the right things a conservative woman looking to have a family would want to hear, but there were plenty of red flags I could have picked up on had I cared to look. But once again, because of my childish internet politics, I treated marriage as this happily ever after fantasy where the credits just roll over your eternally smiling face. I felt so much pressure to get married and start a family young that I didn't bother to look too hard. Not when I was naively terrified of being 30 and unmarried and in love to boot. Do not make this same mistake. And here's the thing. The reason I am so adamant about making this critique right now in what would otherwise be much easier to just do as a simple statement on Twitter or something is because it is not just me. In fact, I would say one of the biggest secrets on the political right is just how many people have had their relationships fall to bits, but will never talk about it. Most of my friends or acquaintances who lean politically right are getting into marriage problems, including people in the political sphere that are much smarter than me and will never do what I'm doing, talking about it publicly. But it's not just them, it's also people with no public profile at all, who married their childhood sweethearts and have been married for a decade. Many of them hardcore Christians who, unlike me, checked all the boxes in the playbook of traditional life. And yet, most people I know are facing cataclysmic marriage problems that none of them could have predicted. Not that it's exclusive to the right, of course. Not at all. I've had heartbreaking numbers of friends sobbing to me on the phone about their relationships falling apart, from progressives to non-political to far right. And yet all of them share one thing in common. Their lives came apart at the seams, unexpectedly, in the same way that mine did. And what's even more heartbreaking than the fact of their struggles through this is that none of them feel comfortable talking about it publicly, or even sometimes with friends and family, because they feel like failures. And the very thought of it is too devastating to express. And it's even worse for those in the public eye, because failing is definitely not an opportunity to improve on the internet these days. Oh no, it is not a time where you reach out for help from the loving masses. It is blood in the water. Which means that a ton of these people are stuck pantomiming marriages that have ceased to exist, stuck in this eternal dance with the corpse of a long-dead relationship because they are too afraid to stop moving and let everyone see that it is a corpse. That is in a vault. Everyone's struggling and ready to talk about, or never ready to talk about with the public, the things they're going through whenever it suits them. That's for you. I would never, ever reveal any of your secrets online. Don't worry. This is my own choice to share my most devastating life moments with the world, because I am an insane person, clearly. And, I gotta say, it is a tragedy that myself, among many others, have created a political and online culture that, quite frankly, has so little openness and understanding to the broken human condition that not only does it leave most of the people in the public eye skittering around in the background on secret calls trying to work through their emotional issues because they constantly have to lie to the audience, but it also, at the same time, because of that, does not prepare adherents of their ideologies for reality, because they're not hearing any of the realities of our lives. We yabber on all day about telling hard truths, but somehow those truths are only ever inconvenient for our enemies and never for ourselves, which means our enemies get more broken by ignoring us, and we get more broken by never turning that gaze on ourselves. I say we because I know what a huge role I have played in building this epistemological wall against self-awareness for so many people. I am sorry for that, and if it makes you feel better, know that unlike Mexico, I am still paying for that wall to this day.
I've seen lots of people say this. Marriages have a 50% chance of divorce. That isn't accurate. 50% of marriages might fail, depending on your statistic. But to suggest that they have a chance, that they're a coin flip ignores the reality of the situation. It ignores the choice that went into marrying said individual. It ignores the community that should hold you guys together. It ignores the choices made within said marriage. It ignores character and virtue. Because a question needs to be asked. 50% of marriages end in divorce. What's going on with the other 50? Now, of course, some people would say it's cheaper to keep her. Some dudes just stay there and they're miserable. Some women just stay and they're being miserable. But everyone isn't miserable. Some people find themselves married and they end up happy. How? I find it also very interesting how quick we are to blame institutions. How quick we are to blame marriage unto itself. As if there isn't a man and a woman involved there, making choices. Having an obligation they're supposed to fulfill but don't. Having children that they failed that they don't consider. Sometimes they didn't even want in the first place. I find it also very interesting that in the end of it all, Miss Southern is upset with the conservative right-wing leanings. Miss Lauren Southern comes and she says she's failed. Miss Southern comes here and she says in so many words, really, that she didn't really believe this stuff. She wasn't really the trad wife she was supposed. This is wrong. She shouldn't have done this. Nay. The problem isn't conservatism, which I'm not really here to defend, by the way. I mean, just to be honest with you guys, but the problem wasn't the trad wife idea. The trad wife LARPing. Well, that wasn't really the problem. The problem is not the institution of marriage, which so many people are so quick to dismiss. The problem is who they picked. Are we going to sit here and pretend that this would have happened if Lauren Southern married a cashier at a gas station who once again was just happy to be there instead of the Australian Fed who was hungry for his powerful position and cared not for Miss Southern? Are we going to seriously sit here and pretend that the same thing would have happened if different choices were made? Of course not. Because a different person would have been picked. Different problems would have arisen. And a person with character and virtue and compassion who loves another individual for their own sake wouldn't have made the choices that man made. We pretend that for some odd reason, I just find really interesting, that we just have this great pretending when it comes to marriage. That the problem, again, isn't two selfish people coming together who want to battle one another for control, instead of two people who come wanting the good of the other person for their own sake, wanting to be in that marriage. I have to imagine things would be quite different, wouldn't it? If Lauren Southern came into that marriage wanting to do everything she could to make his life better. And the Australian Fed came into that marriage wanting to do everything he could to make Lauren's life better. I would imagine that things would have ended up a lot different. Instead, we have a dude who somehow finds himself being upset with his ADHD-having wife telling her that he's going to get a divorce because he can't handle it. Oh, again, an Australian fad. He's got a constitution made out of bloody cotton, doesn't he? Weak! Again, I find it rather interesting that we don't call this nasty, weak, emasculated behavior out for what it is, because gosh darn, that was just crazy to hear that. It's interesting to me that we always want to talk about marriage being bad. Lauren again comes to this conclusion that she was wrong. She was wrong to put her faith into this institution. Wrong to put her faith into marriage. Wrong to think this. Wrong to champion it. But that's not true. That wasn't the problem. The problem was you picked an individual that didn't have virtue. And I know I say it a lot. And I know I'm a goddamn bloody record. Broken bloody record. I apologize. I know I am. Because people keep coming to these wrong conclusions and saying these silly, nonsensical things. The issue is the man you picked. It's not the vow you made. It's who you made it with. You didn't make it with someone that wanted the good of you for your own sake. Someone who loved selflessly, not selfishly. Love is about what you can give to other people, not about what you can take. When you love someone and they love you back, if they have honor, it makes them want to do good. Love compels them to give it back to you. Honor compels them. They feel wrong. You give me so much, I have to do something back for you. That's what honor does. That's what compassion does. That's the type of person you need to look for. We spend so much time on the spark. So much time on the honeymoon phase. So much time on the good, gooey feelings of nonsense that as these stories constantly tell us over and over and over and over and over and over again, it doesn't last. We still, all of us as a society, fall prey to the honeymoon, good, spark, je ne sais quoi vibes feeling nonsense. And that's what happened with Miss Southern. That's what happens to so many young ladies. And you would think that the sisterhood of older women who've already gone through this, just slightly, would say something to them. That it's not men for having a Y chromosome. It's not men for having testosterone. It's not men for existing as we are that just makes them trash. It's the poor character. And that you shouldn't be caught up in the charisma. You shouldn't be caught up in the status. You shouldn't be caught up in the nice smile, the big muscles, how handsome he is. You shouldn't be caught up in that. I remember growing up, I was told oh so very many bloody times that women just don't care about the way men look. Nonsense, of course. You think that the sisterhood would actually be able to educate and tell young ladies to avoid this and not some random nigga on the internet doing it. The problem, again, is not men. It's not marriage. It's not wrong, archaic, traditional, conservative family values. Make of that what you will. If you want to argue against it, I really don't care. The problem is virtue. It's a lack of compassion. It's a lack of love. It's a lack of honor. That's what got Lauren Southern here. And that is the story that gets told by so many women over and over and over again. So my question is this. I have many. At what point are we going to stop with our bloody nonsense here, crying about men being trash? When are we going to dead that? At what point are we going to stop pretending that women don't make bad choices in the men they pick? At what point are we going to stop crapping on marriage and being upset with the laws and the legality instead of being upset with people's character? Because that, more than anything else, is the problem. It's not just getting married. You're not just doomed to a divorce. It's who you choose to get married to that would either make it a success or make it a failure. In some ways, it's pretty simple. In many ways, it's a little bit more complex than we like to believe it to be now, isn't it? So hopefully, I'm giving you guys something to think about, something to ponder, something to chew on. And if I did, then go and click the like button. I mean, you watched the video this long. I mean, you may as well go ahead and click the subscribe button. You can go ahead and comment in the comment box below. As always, man, you guys have yourselves a great day. I will see you cool cats soon. Adios.